Homeless at 18, I planted apple trees without knowing their value. Everyone laughed until a company offered me a fortune. My name is Lisa Parker, and if you had driven past my grandfather's land during the summer after I turned 18, you probably would have laughed just like everybody else did. I certainly wouldn't have blamed you, because from the road there wasn't much to see except an old farmhouse with peeling white paint, a rusty mailbox leaning sideways beside a gravel driveway, and a skinny girl wearing worn-out boots spending her days digging holes and planting tiny apple saplings in soil that most folks around Hartwell County considered exhausted. Looking back now, I can still hear some of the comments people made when they slowed their trucks and rolled down their windows. Some thought I had finally lost my mind. Others felt sorry for me. A few even offered advice, telling me I should forget the farm and move away to the city, where I could start over properly. But none of them understood that I wasn't trying to become rich. I wasn't following some brilliant plan. I was simply trying to survive. You see, becoming homeless at 18 changes the way you think about life. After my grandfather passed away, most of the relatives who attended his funeral disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. Some fought over furniture. Others argued over money that barely existed. A few made promises they never intended to keep. Before long, I found myself sleeping in an old pickup truck with nothing but a few boxes of clothes, photographs, and the title to the 80-acre farm my grandfather had left me. The land wasn't worth much according to everyone around town. Years of neglect had left the fences broken, the barns sagging, and the fields overgrown. But every time I thought about selling it, I remembered sitting beside my grandfather when I was little, listening to him talk about the beauty of planting things you might never live long enough to enjoy. He used to tell me that trees teach patience better than people do because trees don't complain when nobody notices them. They simply keep growing. One rainy afternoon, while cleaning out the old shed behind the farmhouse, I discovered several dusty wooden crates stacked beneath a workbench. Inside were dozens of small bags filled with apple seeds and handwritten notes in my grandfather's faded handwriting. At first, I thought they were worthless keepsakes. But as I read through his notes, I realized that he had spent years experimenting with different varieties. Some came from old family orchards that no longer existed. Others had been exchanged with farmers across several states. Many of the names meant nothing to me, but one sentence caught my attention. Written in shaky letters was something I still remember word for word. Plant them even if you don't know why. Someday somebody else will. I wish I could tell you that I understood what he meant. I didn't. I was 18 years old, lonely, broke, and trying to hold myself together. But those words stayed with me. And so, with no grand plan and no money to hire anyone, I began planting. Day after day, week after week, I dug holes beneath the Missouri sun while sweat soaked through my shirts and blisters covered my hands. I repaired old irrigation pipes with parts scavenged from abandoned equipment. I hauled water in buckets when pumps failed. I slept on a mattress inside the farmhouse because the roof leaked less there than anywhere else. Sometimes supper was nothing more than peanut butter sandwiches and canned soup. There were nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if everybody else was right, wondering if I was wasting the only inheritance I had left on something that would never matter. And people noticed. Oh, they noticed. Hartwell County was the kind of place where everybody knew everyone else's business before sunset. Folks driving past would stop and ask what I was doing. When I explained I was planting apple trees, they usually laughed. One man actually took off his hat, shook his head, and said, "Girl, by the time those things become worth anything, you'll be old and gray." Another neighbor told me that apples wouldn't save a farm. Others suggested I cut the trees down and lease the land for cattle instead. But the hardest comments came from distant relatives who said Grandpa would have wanted me to sell everything and move on. They didn't understand. The land wasn't just dirt to me. It was memories. It was my grandfather's laugh echoing through the barn. It was the smell of rain on summer evenings. It was home. Years passed quietly, and so did I. The trees grew. Slowly at first, then stronger every season. Birds nested among their branches. Bees filled the spring air. Wildflowers returned. The old farm began looking alive again. I didn't become rich. I didn't become famous. Most people still thought I was struggling. Truthfully, I was. But for the first time since losing my grandfather, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. I thought that would be enough. I thought the reward was simply having peace. I had no idea that hundreds of miles away, executives inside a multi-billion-dollar company were desperately searching for exactly what was growing quietly on my little farm. I had no idea scientists were studying rare heirloom apple varieties and searching for orchards that could produce fruits with qualities modern commercial orchards had lost decades earlier. And I certainly had no idea that one morning, while I was pruning branches beside the eastern fence line, 3 black SUVs would pull into my driveway and change my life forever. If you're enjoying my story, subscribe to the channel and share this video, because what happened after those vehicles arrived shocked everyone who had laughed at me, and even today, I still believe my grandfather somehow knew something I didn't. The day 3 black SUVs changed my life. I still remember that morning as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The sun had barely climbed above the hills surrounding my grandfather's farm, and the dew was still resting on the grass like tiny diamonds reflecting the early light. I had spent most of the morning trimming branches near the eastern fence line while humming one of the old songs Grandpa used to sing when he worked around the house. It was one of those peaceful mornings that made all the years of struggle feel worthwhile, because even though I still wasn't wealthy, I had learned how to find happiness in simple things. The smell of fresh earth, the sound of birds moving through the orchard, and the sight of those apple trees standing tall and healthy brought me more joy than money ever had. Then I heard tires crunching slowly against the gravel driveway, and when I looked up, I saw something I had never seen before. 3 black SUVs were making their way toward the farmhouse, moving so slowly and carefully that at first I thought they had taken a wrong turn. My first thought was that something bad had happened. People don't usually drive expensive vehicles down forgotten country roads unless they're lost or bringing bad news. I wiped the dirt from my hands and watched as several well-dressed men and women stepped out. Their clothes looked too clean for a farm, and their shoes certainly weren't made for muddy fields. One of the men smiled warmly and introduced himself before explaining that they represented a large agricultural company that specialized in preserving rare fruit genetics and developing premium products for international markets. I nodded politely, though truthfully I understood only half of what he said. Then he asked a question that made me laugh. He asked if I was the owner of the orchard. I remember looking around at my work clothes, my muddy boots, and the old pickup truck parked beside the barn, and I almost apologized for my appearance before saying yes. The man smiled even wider. Then he said something that made me stop breathing for a second. He explained that researchers from their company had been studying rare heirloom apple varieties that had almost disappeared from commercial farming. Through records and old agricultural archives, they discovered that many of the unique trees planted on my property traced back to genetic lines that had become extremely valuable. According to him, several of the varieties growing on my land possessed qualities modern orchards could no longer reproduce naturally. Their company had spent years searching for orchards like mine and had nearly given up hope before discovering information connected to my grandfather's handwritten records. I remember sitting on the porch with them for nearly 3 hours while they explained everything. To be honest, I felt overwhelmed. For years, I had worried about surviving month to month. Suddenly, these people were talking about international demand, premium products, long-term partnerships, and research programs. My grandfather's notes, which I had protected simply because they belonged to him, turned out to be incredibly important. And then came the offer that changed everything. They didn't want to buy my land. They didn't want to take my orchard. Instead, they wanted to lease sections of the farm, invest millions into preserving and expanding the trees, and establish a long-term agreement that guaranteed I would retain ownership of everything. In return, I would receive enough money to completely change my life, along with a yearly 9% share of the revenue generated from harvests and related products. I honestly thought they were joking. Nobody had ever offered me anything close to that before. I had spent years counting dollars at grocery stores, fixing broken equipment with borrowed parts, and praying the roof would survive another winter. Now strangers were offering me opportunities one couldn't even imagine. I remember excusing myself and walking into the barn alone. There, among old tools and faded photographs, I sat down and cried harder than I had cried since losing Grandpa. Not because I was rich, not because I was excited, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't have to wonder how I would survive next month. I didn't have to worry about losing the farm. I didn't have to choose between repairing the tractor and buying groceries. When news spread through Hartwell County, people reacted exactly the way you'd expect. Some couldn't believe it. Others remembered every joke they had made and suddenly became very friendly. A few neighbors who once laughed at my little trees drove out to congratulate me. I held no bitterness toward them. Life had taught me that carrying resentment only makes heavy burdens heavier. Besides, I remembered something Grandpa always said. Trees don't get angry at people who ignored them. They just keep producing fruit. Within 2 years, the farm looked healthier than it had in generations. New equipment arrived. The old farmhouse received repairs. The barn was restored. I hired workers from the local community, and several struggling families found jobs close to home. Children visited during harvest festivals. Researchers came to study the orchard. People who had never cared about farming suddenly wanted to learn about preserving heirloom varieties. And every spring, when the apple blossoms painted the hills white and pink, I would stand quietly among the trees and think about Grandpa. Then one evening, while watching the sunset from the porch, I opened his old notebook again and found the sentence that had started everything. Plant them even if you don't know why. Someday somebody else will. This time, I understood. Grandpa wasn't talking only about apple trees. He was talking about faith, about hope, about doing good things even when you cannot see the reward. Because sometimes life hides blessings underground for years before allowing them to bloom. Today, I still live on the farm. The land still belongs to me. Every year I receive my share from the harvest, and every season I walk through the orchard and thank God for carrying me through those lonely days when all I had was faith and dirt beneath my fingernails. The money changed my circumstances, but it wasn't the greatest gift. The greatest gift was realizing that my grandfather's love had never really left me. It was growing quietly all along, branch by branch, season after season, waiting for the right time to bear fruit. And if you've listened to my story all the way to the end, I want to leave you with this. Never underestimate small beginnings. Never be ashamed of planting seeds nobody else believes in. And never lose hope when life feels unfair, because some blessings take years to ripen. I wish you peace in your struggles, strength in your storms, and people who believe in you when you cannot believe in yourself. May your days be fruitful, your home be warm, and your heart always remain hopeful. God bless you, and thank you for spending this time with me.